Welcome to the last panel discussion, and we have a heavyweights on stage for the final panel. In the interest of time, we are not going to read out lengthy introduction. Over there, that's Steve Moore, COO of WorkInSriLanka Corporation, and then we have Mr. Ashram Verma, Head of Managing Director Brandings Group, and then Professor Malik Khan, former Vice Chancellor of University of Mogadore, Dr. Hans Vijaysurya, Head of Dialogue, and Mr. Juan Fernando, Group Member, Board of Directors. He's a member of the Board of Directors of WorkInSriLanka Diversified Conglomerate. I'm sure most of Sri Lankans do not require any introduction. So we have a very interesting topic. We are going to, I'm somewhat confused because I got two briefs from the organizers. The first brief is discuss opportunities for innovation, entrepreneurship, and professionalism. Then I was told that I can speak about sector growth and opportunities for Sri Lankan returnees and expats. So we will try to cover both areas. So we are privileged to have these wonderful four business leaders and eminent academics. Why the stage is sagging? Because between them market cap is about couple of billion US dollars, and compound that with the intellect of Professor Malik Khan, that's what you call real weight. So how we are going to do that is, this discussion is, we have two broad areas. The first area, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to discuss very briefly what are the growth prospects, what is the current position and the status of each sector they represent, and what is the quality of growth, and what is the growth momentum and growth prospects. And we will spend about 35 to 40 minutes on that subject. And then we will discuss later, the second half of the discussion, we will discuss what are the opportunities for Sri Lankan returnees, expats, what are the areas, how they can approach any Sri Lankan company, what are the talents that we are looking for, what are the expertise, what are the skills, etc. And meanwhile, if you have any questions, so I will check with you guys from time to time. Please raise your hand if you have a question, and we will get mic over to you. One small reminder, please ask questions and don't repeat the daily mega business page. Identify yourself and make your question as brief and relevant to the question. Don't ask about the latest tariff of data, etc. So that process you can check his website. So please make sure your questions are related to the topic we are discussing today. Let me first ask Mr. Ashram. If you look at the Sri Lankan apparel sector, prior to 2005, many people predicted demise of the sector with the expiration of MFA. And then people said, okay, look, that we don't have the competitive, we don't have price advantage, cost advantage compared to China and Bangladesh and various other low-cost destinations. But Sri Lankan apparel industry didn't die. Instead of that, it has been growing. What I would like to ask Ashraf is to share with us what is the secret. Okay, what sectors we are growing? How did Sri Lankan apparel sector overcome these challenges and continue to grow, and what are the growth prospects? Please spend about 3 minutes.
Thanks, Lakshman. First of all, in 2005, when the predictions, our exports at that time were about $2 billion, and the popular prediction by people not in the industry was that it will halve in a couple of years' time. The industry took up the position that we will double in 4 years' time. Now, if you look back in the last 8 years, we didn't double in 4 years' time, but we have now more than doubled. This year, we will end up at about 4.2 billion in export, 9% above last year. We believe the apparel industry not only is the most exciting industry in the country, I always keep on saying it's the sexiest industry in the country. So, because all the young folks here today, we must attract all of you because easily it's the best industry. Looking at the profile, now out of the $4 billion, we have a very narrow and deep profile of customers. The largest customer being Victoria's Secret or the Limited Brands Group. Then we have Gap, Intimacy being Marks and Spencer. So about 7 or 8 customers make up about 60% of our total export. Per capita wise, Sri Lanka is easily one of the largest per capita exporter of apparel. We are at $175 per capita. China is at about $111 and India is at $11. When we look at the apparel industry, we look at the South Asian region. We don't consider Sri Lanka as our playing ground. We look at the whole South Asian region, that is India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, including Sri Lanka. Maldives and Nepal are not significant. So the potential, we believe Sri Lanka should go to about $5 billion in the next couple of years, and that's in direct export out of the country. But Sri Lanka can act as a hub and service countries, take production of Bangladesh, India and Pakistan, so that we can have a real export of about $10 or $12 billion in the next few years. Now, the industry is changing. Now, there is a normal image or the concept that the Sri Lankan, that the apparel industry per se is a low-tech, labor-intensive industry. It is not so, because if you take the 10 largest exporters in the world, 6 of those countries are Western. In fact, I think the 3rd largest exporter is Italy. 5th largest exporter is Germany. How do they do that? By going into high fashion, high technology. So Sri Lanka, if it is to survive in the industry, and I'm sure it will definitely survive and thrive, we need to keep on changing gears. Now, at Brandix, what we have done is started many processes where focus is on technology. And in order to bring in additional input from outside, my colleague here, Udena, heads a company which we have just started called Disrupt, to invite young entrepreneurs, young engineers to come and set up or to create small businesses with a business model which is not relevant today, so that we can support those small businesses to come up with unique products. I can go on for the next half an hour, but I will stop here, and then maybe the next round I will explain more, but I would prefer Q&A more than a monologue.
Thanks. Let me now request Hans to discuss the opportunities in telco and also slightly outside telco core business, but also technology. If you look at Sri Lanka, the mobile market is saturated. We have, I believe, more registered SIM cards than the population, so it is for the population and we can talk and buffalo probably. We led the growth, pioneered this industry in South Asia, and made a wise decision, 10-15 years ago, moving over to GSM and digital platform. So I'm sure that produces new growth impetus. Hans is in a very, very highly challenging industry because it is highly volatile, subject to fast-changing technology. What I would like to ask is the same question from Hans. What is the status and what is the position of the mobile industry in this country, telecom industry in the country, and how do you see the industry changing next few years?
Okay, I think Sri Lanka is probably not too different from mid-growth stroke the development market anywhere in Southeast Asia, or indeed the developed world. Sri Lanka has a developed technology in telecommunications, which is probably even, I would say, on par with some developed countries. So the challenges that we would face, the opportunities that we would come across, and therefore those returning to Sri Lanka or otherwise working with us would also enjoy, are pretty much heterogeneous in nature. but impacted to a large extent by the variabilities in technology and the future of telecommunications and IT in general. So, in a summary, telcos are challenged on one side. Our products and services could be relegated to the level of being a utility because we live in an internet world, a connected world, and there are many, many over-the-top competitors globally like the Skypes or the Googles of this world who are challenging the domestic telcos in nearly all markets. So the opportunity ahead, the trick that we need to win on is to convert from what we would normally call a dumb pipe, meaning just be a telco provider, a provider of minutes and bits and bytes, but to be a smart provider. The provider of a smart pipe which has around it a plethora of services which enhance the lives of consumers. So here is the huge opportunity, because if you look at our lives, we are increasingly connected. And this doesn't just stop in Colombo or the Western Province. If you look at the lives of even SEC, BC, D consumers, they're increasingly connected. The trishaw driver is connected, the fishmonger is connected, and they rely on technology to carry out their day-to-day business. So telcos, we are no longer, I think, just a telco, but let's call ourselves a telco. The telcos need to, going forward, fight for wallet share of the consumer. So in fact, we can now, with the use of these modern technologies, while being attacked on one side by the Skypes of this world, on the other side, we could go for a share of the consumer's wallet in transport, in health, in education, in entertainment, nearly everything. So this is where Dialog and all telcos who have taken the path of becoming smart pipes, smart service providers, would present a lot of excitement, a lot of opportunities for cross-sector expertise in joining the technology story and building life-enhancing services across sectors, whether it be financial services or health services, education, all with a connectivity background. And therefore, I would say that telcos in Sri Lanka have this very exciting juncture of transforming from being just connectivity providers to being providers of a much, much wider space or span of services, and therefore I think opportunities are rather abound going forward. But if you just answer your question, how much pure raw growth is there in the telco sector? I would say 10% year on year for the next few years. In spite of 100% penetration, I think there are younger people joining the market, there are people who have more than one telephone line. So overall, 10% year on year in terms of revenues is very achievable for the industry, but if we go for broader wallet share of consumers, then it could be much greater.
Thanks, Hans. Let me know as Professor Malik understood about opportunities in the higher education sector. If you look at the Sri Lankan higher education sector is going through quite a transformation, and Minister of Higher Education has set very, very ambitious goals for the higher education sector. Both expecting contribution coming from the state sector as well as the private sector higher education institutes. May I request Professor Malik to enlighten us on what's the current status of Sri Lankan higher education and both state and private, and particularly in relation to technical education? How do you see that landscape of technical education will evolve next let's say next 5 years?
Thank you, Prashant. You're absolutely right. The goals set by the Ministry of Higher Education is pretty ambitious. It needs to be, because it's also a very political issue. As we all know, large numbers of students coming out of the secondary school pass and qualify to enter university by the definition that we have given. In Sri Lanka, we say if you have 3 passes, you have qualified to enter university. But in reality, about 15% of them get placed in the local sector. And there's this whole issue about what do you do with the other 85%. So from one side, there's a huge demand from parents and students who are waiting to enter higher education, because in Sri Lanka, like in most Asian countries, we see education as the way forward. way to get out of, become somewhat better. On the other hand, the state, the students, and even the staff looks at the private, the whole idea of non-state universities or non-state higher education very suspiciously, thinking that it might be one of the reasons that's going to destroy education or sort of get us out of the comfortable situation some of us are in. There is no question we need non-state universities. The word that is not used here is not private universities, non-state universities or non-state education. A lot of offers, a lot of requests are made. But if you really look at the landscape of what's happening today, most of these institutions are providing opportunities for people to leave the country. It's more of a place to get the visa. Very few serious institutes provide a good education. It's almost a handful. So that's the first thing. So there is definitely need for non-state universities. There is the demand. There is a lack of good places. But we also realize education is not an industry that you can go into and come out quickly. Once you go into it, it's a long-term thing. Also, it needs a fairly heavy upfront investment. It's not something that you can do off a move and expect it to grow. Yes, you can do it, that some of them are doing, but that's not higher education. So that problem is there. More importantly, I think there is the need for talent. Right now, we don't have, we set up universities even in the state sector, we don't have enough people. Morocco doesn't have enough people to the level that we're supposed to have. We depend a lot on practicing professionals to come in and help us out. We have a limited number, and then we also have the challenge of keeping the limited number of qualified staff within the university. So certainly, there's a lot of opportunities for people to come back to Sri Lanka with higher education qualifications, with PhDs, who are needed. Salaries are not very exciting, whether it's a state or even with its non-state right now. It's almost comparable. But what's available is a lot of opportunities. And those institutes, so if you take my own university, what we have tried to do is to create those opportunities, which I'll speak about a little later. But that's the opportunities are there, but unlike the two that we heard, higher education is still struggling to get ourselves established in the private sector. Get the non-state universities going. Now, there was for example, there is an initiative that was done by the guy who was my deputy vice chancellor. He has now set up a very interesting institute, and the Minister of Higher Education keeps on quoting that, saying, if professors from University of Morocco can go and set up private universities, why are others getting excited? Nobody's complaining about it. And that was set up for a number of reasons. One was that there was an investor who was prepared to come and wanted to start. Secondly, it was a way of keeping our own people who are here. All of us in the academic sector are entitled to 3 months of, it's called vacation leave. It's to do whatever you want outside the every year. And here was a way of setting it up so that extra income is given to staff members, especially from Morocco and other institutes, who want to come back. So it was a way of keeping our people in Sri Lanka. A second opportunity that was created, which is helping. Now, that institute, for example, has managed to convince Samudra Bank to come up with a loan scheme with very little conditions. There's no security, complete loan for a period, on the promise that they will give you custody. And certainly things like that might come up, creating the environment. Also, a point that I want to raise is that in higher education is not in isolation. It is providing the necessary initial people for all the industries, whether it is apparel, telco, IT, or the tourism. So the industry has to work with the higher education sector. When I say higher education, it's state or non-state. Somewhere along the line, it's not something that they keep aside and expect it to provide. So it needs the guidance and the support and the involvement of the key players. So Ministry of Higher Education, after a long time, I think, seems to have got some ideas. Whether it's popular or not is a different issue. The key thing is there are ideas to come together, which are being debated on both sides, from the private sector and the state sector. So it is exciting times, opportunities will come. but it's not going to come quickly. Having said that, if anybody with a PhD, for example, wants to come back to Sri Lanka, I don't think there's any chance, there's always opportunity in Sri Lanka. All you got to do is write to the Vice Chancellor in any university. They will immediately give you an offer and take it. All may not be as efficient as we are now, but certainly they do try. We have had some bad experiences, but in general, if anybody is interested in coming, then there are opportunities. On the same token, I must also raise a very important point, the right to personal liberty. Coming back is a personal choice. You have to think carefully in coming back. Because it is a, as it raised by Samudra was, it's a very personal choice. However, especially for those who finish their studies at the undergraduate level or at the postgraduate level, it is an important decision that you have to think carefully. For example, when I was finishing my PhD in Canada, there was an international house which had a program said, if you want to come back, if you want to go back, come and listen to us. So the last year that I was there, I went to listen to them. Their point was, when you came to Canada, there was a huge cultural shock. When you go back to Sri Lanka or whatever your country, you'll find that the whole society has changed. Your friends have changed, your family has changed, that the cultural shock would be much greater. However, you have to go back and try to do that, because if you just stay on when you finish your degree, you would always, after a few years, will develop a romanticized image of home. You'll always think it would have been better if I went home than having stayed in this country. And life is too short to be debating about that. So their point was, go back, find out whether you want to stay or not. Give it 2 years. If you find in 2 years that you can't fit back to your home society, come back to Canada. Then you will settle down here, you'll be happy knowing that you have made the right choice. So for all of those who are about to finish their PhDs or just finished their PhDs, please let us know, we will certainly employ you. Have a go, 2 years is fine. Then you will decide whether it's worthwhile staying or not.
Thank you. Let me invite you to share with us about technology sector. So what is interesting about Sri Lankan technology, if you observe the history of Sri Lankan technology last 10 years, the Sri Lankan expats and Sri Lankan returnees have played a significant role in establishing this industry. From IFS, Virtusa, and Sanjeeva, WS2, including from Mani's company here, Mani Kulasuvi's company, Lavan Fernando's company, to name a few. Either they are returnees or they are based in the US or Western country, and they invested in Sri Lanka. So it's interesting observation. Unlike other industries where the expats and Sri Lankan returnees played a significant role in developing this sector. It doesn't mean that there have been many Sri Lankan companies of Sri Lankan origin as well, of course. Let me ask this question from Keith. If you take our IT industry, how do you compare? Where are we placed in the value pyramid compared to other countries in the neighborhood? And so what are the strengths of our sector? Because our sector is comparatively small, compared to what you see in India, particularly India. And also what are the prospects and what are the future directions?
Thank you, Lakshman. I think there are sort of 3 broad parameters that really become important. The first is country. I think Sri Lanka as a country has a certain profile, both in terms of its stability and especially post-cessation of hostilities. I think it's never been better. The country level incentives that the government has provided for many years, not just in the recent past, but for many years has been, I would say, right up there with the leading countries in the world in terms of attracting IT and sort of global BPO companies to Sri Lanka. The second thing I think is really about careers and companies. Are there companies in our space that are sort of being attracted by the Sri Lanka equation? Not just the Sri Lankans who are the diaspora who are coming back, but companies like today you see HSBC and many other sort of BPO companies that have come in here that have been attracted by both the tax incentives and the workforce. And finally, I would say compensation is a big piece to attract these people back. Because while all things being equal, people will come back to Sri Lanka for many different reasons. There is a good compulsion to attract these folk back. But I think our challenge is, as we grow the industry, is to be able to attract people from many other nationalities and countries to come and work in Sri Lanka. And you know, Asia being a sort of very topical and sort of relevant geography for people and managers and leadership to gain and sort of, you know, cut their teeth, if you like, in these markets, because these are sort of perceived as the markets of the future. We sit right next to a very large market, India, and we're not that far from the sort of the Southeast Asian markets. So I think there are many compelling reasons for people to want to come back. On the industry front specifically, I think it has been one of the fastest growing industries, even if you compare it with some of the top 3 players in the globe today, albeit a very small number. So for example, India, their exports was about $75 billion last year. Sri Lanka is in the sort of 500 to 600 range, depending on the statistics that you look at. The number of IT graduates in India is about 400,000. In Sri Lanka, it's about 10,000. But that's not to say that we have to adopt all of the same models, which are predominantly headcount-related revenue or linear revenue. I think in Sri Lanka there's a great affiliation and a sort of mental product kind of mindset, where you see a lot of the IT companies in Sri Lanka are building great products. Some of the companies you mentioned in the room, I can see Creately and WSET, they're building, you know, global companies right here in Sri Lanka with a fabulous talent pool. And I get often asked the question about how do you compare and contrast engineers in Sri Lanka versus the other geographies that we employ people in. And I can tell you, pound for pound, our guys are as good as any of the best engineers in the world. So it's not an issue of competence. So if that's a sort of sweet spot for Sri Lanka, the other piece is, you know, in CIMA context, outside of the UK, as we all know, the largest number of CIMA grads is here in Sri Lanka, and that bodes really well for sort of the financial services sector, setting up opportunities and companies here. So, you know, country, companies and careers and compensation, I think they all have to come together, and they have come together in the past. The industry has been growing at about, you know, 20-25% again, depending on which statistics you go by. And that is a phenomenal rate by, even if you take the largest company, the largest country, that growth rate has fallen off. So Sri Lanka has certainly got a lot of tailwind behind it. And I think we have to be very open to attract talent. I was in an HR forum about a year and a half ago. I don't think I was very popular in my comments, but I told the HR guys to stop chasing their own tails in Sri Lanka, going after the same talent pool, but really think about going after talent pool that is not necessarily Sri Lanka, but bringing them here to Sri Lanka, giving them that Asian experience, which most of the people would love to have. I was recently talking to one of our interns who was here from China, and she said as she got off the plane, she was very apprehensive about coming to Sri Lanka, and why would you say we were the one company in the US publicly listed. She said, as I walked through the airport, I saw this big poster that Batusa had, and she immediately stood by that, got somebody to take a picture and sent it back home, saying, you know, this company looks very good. It exists. So I think there's a lot has gone on all 3 fronts. I think there's been some tremendous work. The private sector, the companies in our space have taken advantage of those opportunities, 3 C's, if you like.
Thank you, Keith. Rohan Paran, who is not familiar, anyone who is not familiar with Sri Lanka, it's a sector. Rohan represents the board of directors of Expats, which is, as I said earlier, a large conglomerate with extensive presence in hospitality, shipping, logistics, plantation, consumer marketing, etc. Rohan is involved in a very interesting project that is to promote Sri Lanka as a retirement destination. So I would like to request Rohan to briefly discuss about that sector, as well as given that Expats has a significant presence in the hospitality industry, what are the growth prospects, and how is the tourism landscape is currently evolving.
Yep. Thank you, Lakshman. Well, I think the retirement
space may not be good for this audience, so I will keep that down to a minimum. I think many of you are a long way off from there. But if I may start on the tourism space connected with Sri Lanka as a tourism destination, one sector that, if at all, got the impetus after the war, as I feel, is the leisure or the hospitality sector. The improvement in the logistics, and number 3 is the improvement in the infrastructure. These 3 areas really gave the much needed boost for Sri Lanka as a destination, because we had everything all these years. If you compare with our neighbors like Malaysia, Maldives, India or Thailand, destination to destination we could have matched or bettered them, but we had these inhibiting factors, and therefore there were lots of stifling factors that did not create opportunities for people like you. But in the last 2 or 3 years, there has been some very significant development, which Southern Highway, the new airport, so much of infrastructure in terms of airports, shipping routes and so on and so forth, has created some new very significant development. For instance, in the last 3 or 4 years, charters were unknown to Sri Lanka, because charters is what gives growth to tourism, where large numbers of tourists come to Sri Lanka. And all these years we did not have those 400-500 room hotels where Dreamliners could come and land and create the kind of opportunity for 500-600 tourists to come in. But today we have been seeing many of the large brands coming in. For instance, you see Shangri-La, you see Movenpick, our own company as a joint venture with Riu, which is one of the largest operators in the US. In fact, all their hotels, in Europe, all their hotels are over 500 rooms. So these are all going to create opportunities for people who are interested in this area. Having said that, apart from the large hotels and the smaller boutique type hotels, which are also synonymous with the leisure traveler, the high spender, so many other opportunities are there. For instance, opportunities for architects, opportunities for construction, opportunities for services, which I think Sri Lanka could clearly benefit by, because being a world-class destination, and we want to be comparable with all the other destinations in Sri Lanka, the closest neighbor Maldives. I think there are enormous opportunities for those of you who want to come and work here. And I can tell you there is a huge shortage of skilled personnel. What I hear from my colleagues in both destination management and hotels, there are shortages of very high quality hoteliers, technical specialists in the tourism area, chefs, even going down right to the lower level, because today here what is happening, if you go to the Middle East or if you go to any of those countries, many of the key positions are held by Sri Lankan. In fact, one investor who was working with us in the Middle East told us, look, if I build a hotel, I'm going to ask you all to come and manage it, because why should I ask a big brand? Because all these big brands have Sri Lankans in key positions. So Sri Lankans have a fantastic name overseas, and as I said, I'm sure there are a lot of opportunities for if any of you want to come and make hospitality a career. And this is the time, I feel, because we have so many things that, for instance, Sri Lanka is the only country in this region that is devoid of conflict at the moment. Every other country you see around this area is having some conflict or other. So here is a great opportunity. Coming finally to this area of retirement. It's not really retirement per se, it is the destination of Sri Lanka for people who want to come and spend the golden years of their life giving back to their own country. Because there are a lot of people, doctors, lawyers, professionals who have worked overseas, made a lot of money, who like to come and give back something to their motherland. And that's what Sri Lanka is opening out now. And again, the government has done a lot to encourage people to come. There are a lot of tax breaks, there are a lot of other advantages. Maybe there are small issues, but not issues that cannot be overcome. And there is a lot of opportunities again in this area of what we call the retirement space. Because today, many of you know that, although all of you here are probably in the under 40 category, the world is graying today. Most countries are having their populations over 55, Japan, China, Europe, and there are a lot of opportunities for goods and services connected in that area. And this is exactly what I think Sri Lanka could do better than most countries, because we have the climate, we have the food, we have everything you need. And also compared to India, this is a country where you can see within 7 days. The whole country is so intertwined today with all the infrastructure and the roads, that there are a lot of opportunities for people who want to come and spend the golden years of their life. So these are some of the few thoughts I have on this area of tourism and destination management. Thank you. Rohan. So what we try to do is the first half of our discussion is to give some perspectives about the status and the position of these sectors and how we see that these sectors will evolve foreseeable in the next few years. Have your questions ready. We will open the discussion for floor questions. But now let me ask our panel members what is so exciting about their respective sectors, and where the talent is needed, and what are the opportunities. Let me again start with Ashrof Verma. Now you mentioned about the sex appeal of your industry. Now, apart from the sheer pleasure one gets by observing a model wearing lingeries, what are the other exciting things about what will excite a young professional living abroad about your industry? Why should you come and join Mandarin?
So, you're leaving the best part out, but I will love that. You see, the industry is changing now. It's no more the cheap labor, right? We are selling solutions, we are selling value. So, if you look at starting from R&D, you will need engineers, chemists, physicists, who can look at the development of product or process. Technology, right? We need people who can use the mobile technology for production, for sales, for following up on processes. You need top-class accountants, obviously, right, for the services. Recently, we tied up with a company called Extension, and what we are trying to experiment is whether we can bring world-class processes to join with us so that we can provide better service and to give a service to a customer at a value which he cannot get elsewhere. It's not price, it's not cheap labor, it is the value of the product and service that we provide. So, across the whole spectrum, we have a demand for talent. And as I can see, all of us are bullish on how things are going, so there will be a war for talent, right? And all of us will have to compete with each other. So it's a great time for Sri Lankans or foreigners to come here and participate in the growth opportunities that will present themselves and already present. You can look at, say, on one side at the doom and gloom situation, right, by reading some of the press, but the reality is different. And I believe that the apparel industry provides a fantastic exposure, because you see, we don't compete with anybody in Sri Lanka. We have to compete with the world. And therefore, everything we do has to be world class to compete with the best in the process. And like I mentioned earlier, 6 out of 10 are Western countries. So that's the market that we want to capture.
So going back to the status of the industry, so is our industry evolving fast enough to attract highly qualified people with specialized skills? You are a PhD in telecom engineering, or automation or robotics, graduate from MIT. Will you take it? And where will he come in? And will you fully utilize his capabilities?
Yeah, I think definitely the case, because what's exciting about this industry, as I said before, not only in Sri Lanka but in many developing markets, is the opportunity to convert technology to application and to actually be at the front line in front of the customers, and when you talk of customers, the consumers number not just 10 or 20, it's millions, and that gives you that experience as well as fulfillment, taking a technology, converting it into something which can be used, and in this converged world, that use is now multifarious. It spreads across multiple services. So even if you're in banking, there would be a job for you in a new telco. If you're in content services, or even in education services, or even in psychology, consumer ergonomics, consumer experience, all these are knowledge areas and facets of expertise which can find gainful employment, interesting, exciting employment with the new telco. And I think this is an area we need to specifically speak to not only those who are looking to return to Sri Lanka, but also a direct message to the top performers in Sri Lankan universities and secondary education. Why not look at working in Sri Lanka from a different perspective? The world is changing. Technologies are morphing the differences between various sectors, and an engineering graduate, for instance, need not be set 100% set in his or her mind that he must get an engineering job, because the way hardware is changing worldwide, and as Professor Anderson very rightly said that if you get a qualification in some of the good schools here in secondary or in tertiary education, that is almost like a passport or a visa. But why should it be? We are operating technologies which are on par with any country in the world. It's simply how we apply the Sri Lankan ingenuity to convert that into gainful business here in Sri Lanka. So I've come across that in recruitment, in career development, where many of our top performers who, as Keith said, they match the best in the world. But the mindset of wanting to do exactly what they were taught to do.
Let me stop you there. See, for the technologies, technically competent people, yes, there's a direct fit. Now let me ask a question. There is a Sri Lankan who has a PhD in anthropology. Okay. Would you use that kind of a person to understand how Sri Lankan use mobile phone, or sociological aspect of it? Is there such opportunity? Because it's not only the technologies, we ship about 10,000 students every year. And not all of them are doing business studies and, technology and science. There's a substantial proportion of, students go abroad and they study humanities. So what are the opportunities for, I'm not sure whether there's anybody here, in a attorney done a, degree in humanities. What are the opportunities for them in a technology company like yours?
So first of all, I won't disqualify somebody for having a PhD in anthropology. So that's, and as Professor Anderson said earlier, it's also personal choice why that person chose to do anthropology and went as far as getting a PhD in anthropology, and what was the fulfillment he or she expected from that. And if you look at it from our end, we are dealing with human beings, and if you move a little from anthropology to sociology, for example, we would value very much people who understand human behavior, because technology is meaningless unless used properly and used gainfully in the hands of consumers. And engineers are not necessarily the best people to understand what their innovations actually do in the hands of human beings. So there is no barrier to a background, a person with any background, any knowledge, but it depends what they have gained from that experience in academia. Is it knowledge of human beings? Is it a deep knowledge of interaction? Is it a deep knowledge of repercussions? It's a deep knowledge of cause and effect, for example. And that is what we would hire them for.
Great, I think you answered that question. Any questions from the floor? Please raise your hand. We will take 3 questions. We'll take questions in clusters. There's a gentleman over here, white t-shirt. Yep. Can you rush mic please to this gentleman over here? Yep. Okay. All right. Very briefly, it's a question, not a speech.
Hi. Good evening, everyone. I am Naveed from Pakistan. I have done my graduation from Sri Lanka by a private institute here. My question is, how Sri Lanka so far providing the opportunities for non-Sri Lankans who have studied from here, because every week we got an email from our institute that we have some internship opportunities, but when we go there and ask that as a non-Sri Lankan I am not suitable for applying any internship opportunities here in Sri Lanka. So today our very good CEOs are here. So I want to ask you, what is the procedure if I want to get internship here in Sri Lanka? I am a marketing graduate, fresh graduate from a private institute.
Thank you. We take one more. Gentleman over here.
I did do a PhD in anthropology. I did it in astrophysics, which may be a bit more difficult for thing, but the only place that actually even gave me a visiting lectureship is the University of Baroda, but they pay me less than minimum wage in the US, so I'm not sure it would have attracted me.
Okay, take one more question over there. That's not a question, am I right?
Yeah, I just want to know how do they attract people back.
Okay, let's come to that. Yeah.
Yes, I actually live in the US, been there for 30 years. And I have a question for Rohan with heritage and the retirement community. So could you give us a little insight into what the concept is? And there are a lot of foreign-based folks here, so how would we look at it?
Okay, so last question is for Rohan. Second question is to Professor Manikanda Senior, and the first question I will leave it to either Ms. Oma or Kiko. Yeah, this let's call retirement. It's called the Heritage Grove. We've set it up in Nigambo. It's a 30-acre property styled on a US country club concept where we have 140 high-end villas with all the other facilities like clubhouse. We're also hoping to build a golf course very soon, swimming pools and so on and so forth. And our target market is Sri Lanka, non-resident Sri Lankans who are working overseas in the US, Europe, and in maybe Southeast Asia who want to come back. Not necessarily to retire here, but make Sri Lanka their second home. 6 months here, 6 months in the west to get away from the winter. And we've also funnily had a lot of inquiries from non-Sri Lankans, like Indians, a lot of people who have had an affinity to Sri Lanka, like the British and Europeans. So as I said earlier, this may not be strictly for people like you, but it creates lots of opportunities in retirement community living, meaning goods and services and skills associated with this industry, because it's a huge industry in the West, and there are a lot of opportunities for even young professionals to in caregiving, working in terms of physiotherapy and so on and so forth. So I think from Sri Lanka as a destination, it's a good thing for us from a Sri Lankan perspective to promote Sri Lanka as a second home, so that we have much more value coming back into this country. I hope I answered. Okay, the second question, I will skip that for a moment. Can you have one more mic please on the stage? Because there are only 2 mics here. No, because the second question I would like to take that with my second question to you. That young gentleman over there, he wants to know non-Sri Lankan what are the opportunities for internships in industry for someone like him who just completed his studies in Sri Lanka.
So, and I think there might be some context with BOI and non-BOI companies, but I know many companies in our space, both in IT and BPO exports, as well as more local companies who have fairly broad internship programs where they have students coming back during summer vacation and so forth, and have active internship programs as part of that. So I'm not sure what the sort of issue you're raising specifically is. I know in the previous session we had also talked about work permits and work visas and some of the challenges associated with that. But
in terms of internships per se, I don't think there's any limitation in terms of someone offering you an internship in their company.
Okay, thank you. Now let me come back to you. Your question, I believe your question is about how to attract people with less than minimum wage. Now, what I would like to ask from the Malik is, you are also a returnee, and you returned to Sri Lanka from Canada after doing your PhD, I believe, in late 70s, when the salary scales were even less, even worse. So how do you attract, Sri Lankans going to go? It is. Yeah, how do you attract PhDs who complete their, their studies in Western countries, and what is the incentive for them to come back, despite the fact that the salary scale is not that great?
Having said that, you also remember, universities are places that send our young people out officially. We give them leave for 3 years, 9 months, expect them to get a PhD and come back to Sri Lanka. And it takes us about 5 to 6 years to get them back. And our return is about 10%. So it's a huge challenge for a Vice Chancellor, for example, to get them back. If you don't get them back, again we are at fault because we have used state funds. And that guy is gone. So we have this, especially in engineering, it becomes a very difficult task. Given the very question that you raised, the salary that we offer is so low. How do you compete for a guy who's going to come back at the end of his PhD? So I'll take it from that context. What we started doing is we started identifying individuals for higher studies. We used to categorize them into 3 areas. There were some who would come at any cost, whether we increased salary or not, he was coming back. Then there was another lot who were on the fence, looking at reasons to come back, but still thinking of staying on. Then there's a third category who comes back at any cost. How, 1 year into his study leave, we know that he's not coming back because we have every 6 months they must send progress reports. The head of department is supposed to monitor. Those in the third category we become very nasty. We are not, which we consciously do. We are not very accommodating when he wants extension of leave. As soon as his time is over, we terminate the person and we go after their sureties. Because to get their scholarships or their leave, lots of people have to get their sureties. And when you start going after the surety starts putting pressure on the guy because he's doing very well in the States or Canada, and the poor guy who is here is getting hungry. So we are very nasty. We don't accommodate, we go after. The people on the fence and the people who are coming back are very important. We know we can't do much with the salary. Unlike the gentleman here who can pay for talent, we can't pay for talent. What we try to do is we try to create opportunities. And every other department, at Morocco for example, is always in the lookout for opportunities. That is, here is a guy who is coming with expertise. And the senior staff and the department is supposed to goes on talking with the industry saying, I have a guy coming, he has an expertise in robotics. And by the time the person comes back, we have identified how that person can be used with the industry on contract research consultancies. Not fundamental research. We look at contract research, meaning he has a problem, we will give you a solution. From the university we create short courses and postgraduate courses which helps us to win. It may not sound very exciting, but first of all we have to create all those opportunities. And what we also did at Morocco for example, which we are studying into, we found a very interesting circular called public finance circular 38, which helps us to earn money and keep all the money in the university without giving anything back to the state. That helped us a lot to increase our profile. For example, at Morocco, we are earning about 30% of the grant that we get, and everything is kept inside. That is used to pay. What we promise a person to come back is not salary. And if you ask most staff members at Morocco, they are not really interested in salary. They are more interested in the opportunities. If, for example, today somebody said, university staff can't do consultancies and other things, the magic word is work over and above your normal work. You are entitled to be paid for any work you do over and above your normal work. So what we have done is very nicely defined what a workload for a staff member is. As long as that is fulfilled, sky is the limit. And that's how we have managed to attract. So salary alone is not enough. Now that's a problem we had when we tried to bring expat to Sri Lanka. Having said that, also along with a lot of the expat states, we have created a situation where we started academic year, or used to start academic year in May, so that the expat who wants to come back for summer can come and teach for a while and work. What do? We give them a nice appointment and work. We don't give him any more than that money, but that appointment is good enough for him to get a grant, travel grant and something else to come to monitor and work. We also arrange for him to do some postgraduate teaching, which we can do a little bit more. But the advantage that person brings to monitor or university is that there's a lot of transfer of ideas. He gets to spot the good guys to take it back. So those things work. I'm sorry that it goes to pay only that much. But certainly that's what we try to do. It's a challenge. That's why I say anybody who has finished a PhD or about to finish a PhD and wants to come back, what we do is we don't wait for a job. We immediately give an appointment. So by the time he comes back, there's an appointment. Then we do the advertising, do all the legal process, and get the guy in as a regular person. But there's no. So we have bent the rules to the maximum that we have. We even have a thing called a Rajadev option, which is if something has been terminated. Now in Sri Lanka, if you have got a termination notice, or vacation of course, you can't re-employ him. But we have created a way by which that guy can be legalized and taken. That is correct. And so we have done everything. We will do everything that's legal.
Let me stop you there in the interest of time. Thank you. I believe that answered your question. So it's not only the salary scale, but various amount of other things as well. Let me go to Keith. Apart from technologies again, what are the other areas what are the other disciplines that you are looking for, where you require talent? Apart from the technologies, what are the other functions?
Yeah, actually I want to, if you look at our billboard out there, and you look at the sponsors of this event, the preponderance of them are all technology companies. And I think that's probably an indication of the interest and the sort of companies that are interested in this demographic. And I think it will be interesting to see as this goes on, how we can see more mainstream, quote-unquote, companies are also part of this in terms of attracting either Sri Lankan diaspora back or international talent. So obviously, in our industry, what happens over time is that all of our employees become eminently employable on a global scale. And if you think about sort of the senior retention programs that we have and so forth, some of the challenges are really about what are the opportunities in other geographies. And many of our people get sort of fast-tracked through those processes because there's a global talent pool. These guys are eminently employable. So I think it's important that going back to the 3 C's, country, career, company, or compensation becomes a big part of all of this. To answer your question about what are the different contexts or what are outside of hardcore technology that's available, obviously we're big into consulting. So when you talk about consulting, you're looking for people who have domain knowledge, who have experience and expertise in banking and financial services or telecommunications, independent software vendors and so forth. So all of those kinds of skills are directly and eminently employable by us globally. And so we're looking for people who can lead in with consulting, we're looking for architects, we're looking for project managers, we're looking for sort of industry expertise. And I think from a Sri Lanka standpoint, as companies are now growing to that level of size and scale, they really need to take advantage of people with that kind of mindset and background, because now they need to optimize. It's got to a point of scale that you need those people. And I'm sure if you look at the tourism industry, if you look at our 5-star hotels in the city, there's a large preponderance of them that are manned by foreigners who are not taking any pay cut to come back to work in Sri Lanka. They're working on a global scale. And I think the industries will find their niches and their requirements for that talent. it will solve their problem.
So what is coming out is something very, very interesting, because there's a popular perception, correct me if I'm wrong, that Sri Lankan industry, Sri Lankan companies are not mature enough or developed enough to absorb certain highly skilled people. Ladies and gentlemen, what we hear from is a totally different story, that from Bandix to Virtusa to University of Bagantua, and they are willing to absorb people with specialized skills, highly qualified people, and they will also find go and create jobs, create openings, so that the companies will get maximum benefit out of these people. Because that is something I often hear when I travel and when I meet my own batchmates who migrated, that what can I do when I return to Sri Lanka? Now, what Mr. Ashok Omar said is that they are willing to talk to people who have engaged in R&D, fundamental science research, etc. So that's extremely encouraging. We will take, if the questions are ready, we will take 3 more questions. Okay. We have 2 here. Yeah. To keep the gender balance, we will take 1 more question from this lady. Mics? Yeah, over here.
Hi, my name is Jeffrey. This question is for Hans, mostly. Are you able to, for telecom industry, are you able to find all the talent, almost all of the talents that you need within Sri Lanka, or are you kind of dependent on, like the way Ashok and Keith mentioned, they're always looking for outside talent, whether it be Sri Lankans abroad or foreigners? My understanding was the telecom industry Sri Lanka is pretty well, equipped. I stand to be corrected.
Thank you. Over there. And there is 1 more person.
Hello, I'm a psychologist, I'm a business psychologist. I'm also an academic, and I've been teaching in a private university. I've been having about more than 150 students under me on psychology. One of the biggest problems that they face after they finish their degree is that people are reluctant to recruit them, even though they study many processes within the organization and they are very good in research methods and analysis. My question is, how ready are the organizations to accept a field like psychology as something that is fundamental, because it actually looks at the human behavior? Dr. Hans actually touched on that, but I'd like to pose this question to all of you. How ready is Sri Lanka as a country, and how ready are your companies to actually...
Thank you. Would you mind passing the mic to this gentleman over here, in the second row?
Hi, my name is Shaveen Bandarnayaka. I'm a startup advertising agency. I own a startup advertising agency. My question is actually for everyone, the entire panel actually. I feel that, I think Dr. Vijayasuri as well as pretty much everyone touched on the fact that, at the current stage of it, people think that it's sort of a ready passport to actually go abroad to study, and then from that point onwards to sort of settle there. But I think with the information age, it's kind of a fallacy in itself, because personally, I have a BSc in computing as well as an LLB, and I'm currently reading my masters, all 3 of which I studied while I was here through distance learning. And what I feel is, as in my question rather, is that don't you think that there should be, perhaps in the corporate sector itself, sort of a culture where they foster students who are coming out of maybe A-levels or whatever other local establishments, to actually foster them in order to do their higher studies or education via distance learning with the support of the corporates themselves. Whereas they don't really have to think of, okay, I need to go abroad and study, and then they get enticed into whatever opportunities there, and then have to be pried back here. Rather than that, with the advent of distance learning and whatever remote study methods, if the corporate...
I think we got the question.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hans, first question. Telecom sector.
Yeah, of course, there's plenty of opportunity from 2 perspectives. One is that from an organizational development point of view, we look at diversity. And we certainly value as much diversity as possible, not only from a cultural perspective, from a nationality perspective, but also skill and background and so on. So as far as it's feasible, we do mix in have a very fair mix of local graduates, foreign graduates, expatriates, so that the mix that we create is a learning organization. Learning not only in technology, but learning in interaction and dealing with different types of people and collaborating. I think it's very important because we are in a customer-facing industry and converting rapidly changing technology environment to something which Sri Lankans use, and that is a science in itself. And so, for sure, we look for diversity, and I wouldn't say that telcos in this country should or are self-sufficient from pure indigenous talent.
Would you also like to touch on the question of psychology graduates? Anybody else?
Yeah, I think that is going to, but again, being a customer-facing organization, also from an internal perspective, having an employee base which ranges from the rigger who climbs towers in rain and lightning from all parts of the country, all the way to the high-tech graduates and even PhDs that we have. From an internal perspective, that's a huge role for psychology and work orientation, but from an external perspective, in product development, in adaptation, in customization, we would value the inputs of business psychologists as well as behavioral psychologists.
Let me ask
Rohan. Sorry, just to answer your question about psychology, I think the human-digital interface is getting closer. It's certainly there are far more multiple channels of interaction with technology and human beings, and I think that sort of user experience and then user journey is getting closer to the core. And I don't know, you can take a view of what's coming next. And there's also a demography that, especially the people who are categorized as millennials or Gen Y born after 1984, that are adopting a digital strategy that is sort of fundamental to them. And I think you're going to see the requirement for psychologists is probably ahead of us in that context and behind us, so they will not to despair.
Let me ask Rohan to respond to the last question about should corporates nurture or foster young graduates, encourage them to have to follow distance learning courses, etc.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, it's a very valid point. But one of the things I find that is that, most young people, I don't want to make a blanket statement, once they come and start working, they all get caught up in the operational responsibilities that many of them don't want to study further, or during the job, they'll say, okay, I'll study next year and next year and next year and next year sometimes doesn't come. So there is that dilemma as well. But what you say is absolutely right, and I can say our own experiences that we find that some of the graduates who have followed, say for instance, there is this Royal Institute that has this University of London degrees. Some of those graduates who work with us are comparable to any graduate who has graduated overseas. So you don't have to really go overseas to get that, mega qualification. I think most of them who qualify here are easily comparable, but this is a conflict that I see. Sorry?
You're offering as part of your benefits so that the employees know that they have benefits.
No, we encourage anybody to study, but I must say the job comes first, because you had to first deliver on your performance. But if anybody wants to study, we offer them opportunity provided it's in their own career. The anthropology, and expect the company to fund it, something like that.
Okay, any more questions?
Sorry.
You're an exception to, in Sri Lanka, distance education is not very easy. Because our pedagogy of the way students want to be taught is they need a class, they need a teacher. For example, we have been trying the external mode, both in Mode 2 and Colombo. It has not been as successful as expected, because students need somebody to guide them in Sri Lanka. Distance education by the very nature requires self-motivation, and that's why I say you're not a normal student. So even if you encourage, sometimes you would not find many students succeeding in the distance. They would much rather go for class, pay something, and that's why we had a big project, Asian Development Bank project called NODES, or Distance Education Modernization Project. That has not taken off. It has been by all questions, it is a failure in Sri Lanka. Also on the business psychology, I must say, you also have to take a step back. Sometimes students feel that they're psychologists, so they need to look at the psychology. We have the same problem. When we introduced fashion design on the invitation of the fashion industry, our students thought they were fashion designers. And when we spoke to the captains of industry, they said, no, we need a lot more. But when we spoke to the HR people, they said, no, we have 2 fashion designers in our organization, we don't want anymore. So having understood that, we went back and told the students, you are not fashion designers, you have been taught in fashion, you haven't, so this whole chain needs different, you have been buying office, you needed production, you needed, and what you have is knowledge on fashion design. So similarly, I think it's a new thing, they must look at different opportunities, not say I need a job only on business psychology.
Excellent. Before I take the last 3 sets of questions, because we've got only 10 more minutes, let me ask this question for the benefit of academics and researchers who would like to return to Sri Lanka. What is the current state of industry university collaboration? I will ask this question from every one of you. Whoever would like to. Obviously, I would like to ask Dr. Sagansino to comment, and perhaps Ashraf, you also would like to add to it. And from the perspective of how it would be useful to a returnee.
Today, it's way much better than when we used to. There was a conscious, for example, in Morocco, we made a conscious decision in 2000 that university alone can't produce an engineer or a technologist. We needed industry. So we, from that point, we created what we call industry department development boards. Every department at Morocco has this board which is represented by industry. Not the captains of industry, but the lower level, people who really are needed, who are prepared to spend time. That has been a really good experience for us, because every 3 months, department meets, listens to industry. It doesn't mean that we accept everything that is said, but we come back and say why that is workable or not. That has helped immensely to understand what industry needs, and for industry to understand what the university needs. For example, if you come to the textile department today, you see classrooms sponsored by companies. They have done it up beautifully, air conditioned the whole thing, which is not done. That is because when industry came, they saw that they have a need. It's a simple example. But similarly, because of that, we find a lot more opportunities coming. Whether it's in research, whether it's in contract research, whether it's in university industry research institutes like the Dialogue Lab or the DSI Lab. So there's a lot more opportunities, especially for a person with a PhD who comes back today, would find, unlike when you were a student, there's a lot more interaction going on. And also industry has seen the need and the benefits of working closely with the university. So we do see a lot more involvement in whether it's a career stage or whatever it is, there is involvement. However, having said that, do we have enough research funds being given by the industry? Certainly not. We would like a lot more. But then, today's Sri Lankan industry is still not geared towards fundamental research. What they have is problems, we want a solution. And I think universities also must understand, or academics, or any research must understand, you can't come and do the same thing that you're doing in the States, or in Canada, or with your PhD. You must be able to adapt to what is needed by industry. So you might have done a very high-flown PhD in mobile technology, but maybe what they want is to solve the current problems. But once you build that relationship, then the newer things, the more difficult ones, the more fundamental things can be approached.
Let me build another perspective to that. Ashraf, is it possible for a university lecturer, a professor, to take sabbatical and work at Grand 1 year?
Yeah, we already have that. And I must recognize Professor here, because I think he changed the whole concept even at Morocco. Because the industry university tie-up years ago, we wanted to do a research project at Morocco, and I went there maybe 15 years ago. and offered them an X amount of money, because we were getting double tax deduction at that time, which is now triple for our plastics company. And so I offered the money and I said, we will do the research. And we gave the area also. So they didn't know how to handle it. After about 2 months, I met this professor and he's telling me, I'm attending to your problem. I said, hey, this is not my problem. I'm giving you the money, right? It's your problem. But now, today, the whole culture is different. I think they have transformed that place, and the association between the industry and Moratu, I think if you go there, you can see the difference. And Malik is responsible.
We'll take those few questions. There are three hands. We'll see. Yeah.
I'm Kanchana Gangavita. I am in the WorkInSriLanka team. I'm also at the central bank. This CEO panel has been selected from the leading industries in Sri Lanka, and we gave it a lot of thought. But what I noticed now, and actually noticed during our deliberations as well, is that it is highly gender biased and it's all male. What are the opportunities for women? We see functional heads like Chandi, especially in areas such as HR. But what are the opportunities for women? Because if you...
Excuse me, are you referring to women who are returning to Sri Lanka, or it's a general question? If it's a general gender question, I'm sorry, this is not the problem.
It is not a general question, but it is... It would be a general question and also something that is relevant for women.
You need to phrase it in such a way that it is relevant to the topic. Can we move to the next question, please?
Lakshman, if you would let me finish.
Lakshman, I think let us take it's a very important question.
I think this is a very important thing that needs to be addressed.
It's alright. It's okay.
Because WorkInSriLanka is targeting middle and high level, and I think people who are returning would also like to know whether it is sending a signal.
Let me answer you on behalf of brands. Right? In our case, 3 of our 10 or 12 CEOs are women. The largest business group is handled, the CEO is a woman. And we constantly debate. Unfortunately, at the main board level, we had a woman, but right now we don't. And we are constantly, I agree with what you say, because I think we are missing out a lot if we don't bring in and actively engage women to take over key positions in the company. So I don't think whether the bias is due to some male chauvinistic practice, but maybe culturally, you see, because women come into the workforce, work up to a certain age, once they get married, they leave, right? So maybe due to social reasons, but I agree with you that we should actively promote at least 20, 30, 40% of senior key management should be women. So I think your question is relevant.
Other 2 questions? There are 2 more questions. Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Lakshan. I'm returning from holiday in New York, my question is to Mr. Ashraf Omar. To analyze labor markets in Sri Lanka for apparel and being one of the largest employers. You said brand mix, for example, is focusing on value addition, but after a certain point, there will come a time where value addition will be counterproductive. At which point are you considering changing your business plan, which would change the current hiring process? Right now, you're investing in R&D and other relevant sectors. Is that something which you guys have thought of? Thanks.
We'll take one last question.
Hello. This is a question from the perspective of recent graduates. I grew up in the United States and was studying at Stanford University. And the other Sri Lankans at Stanford debated, the timing for returning back to Sri Lanka. A lot of them intended to return to Sri Lanka, but it was a question of whether to gain work experience in Sri Lanka or to stay abroad, stay overseas in some other developed country gain that experience, and then return. So I'm wondering if you could speak to opportunities for professional growth when you're just starting out your career in Sri Lanka, and whether you really do prefer, I mean, in the morning's panels, it was mostly, we heard from really distinguished panelists who have had really incredible careers and then returned to Sri Lanka. But what about people who are returning to Sri Lanka right at the beginning of their careers? And I do have to say that as a woman coming to Sri Lanka from the United States, the gender issue is very relevant, and I would like to hear from all of you about how you to overcome those barriers and actually encourage what your thoughts are on why women are not advancing to that higher level. What is that glass ceiling and how can we overcome that? Thank you.
So there are two questions. First question asked, second question.
The first question I would just wanted to clarify where I didn't understand fully. Can you just repeat it please if you don't mind? Sorry? Value addition? Can you just... Yeah.
Value addition now at this point. So would you be changing your hiring process or like with the business model of branding, so any of that industry-based company change?
I don't see value addition becoming irrelevant, because if you look at the retail price today, it's 5 times the export price, right? Because there are so many other processes that go on before the goods reach the consumer. So our plan is to try and claw back as much as we can of the value before it goes to the final consumer. For example, if you do internet sales, we can do all the delivery from here instead of all run our own warehouse in the Western markets. So I don't think in the near future or even in the medium term that we will say that value addition is irrelevant, because we have to claw back a huge chunk which is the difference between the export price and the final retail price. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. Next question again.
Let me start off, not to defend. So first on the gender balance, for sure now, in fact, just to speak for Dialogue, we have 3 out of our 7 top management female, including the CFO, so you know where the purse strings are tied to. So there's absolutely, gender balance or a glass ceiling is not even perceived, but it's interesting to hear and the applause from the audience that is actually the case. So it's something we all probably need to be extra conscious about. On the second, on your first question, I think it boils down to personal choice first, personal decision. Do you want to build a career in Sri Lanka? And if I was to relate a story from the dinosaur era when I actually studied abroad, which was in 1986 to 89, I did my first degree, came back to Sri Lanka, I worked for 2 years in an MNC here, in IBM actually, and then when I got a call to go back for my PhD, I made a decision, and I chose what I was going to do for my research and for my PhD according to my assessment of what would have potential back in Sri Lanka in 4 years. So this is where I keep wanting to address the top graduates from Sri Lankan universities and people like you who are looking to come back after the first degree. When choosing your postgraduate, do that intelligently if you want to come back to Sri Lanka. At that time, in the company I worked for, there were 2 mobile phones. And my bosses used to share these 2 mobile phones. They're such a scarce resource. So I just made a guess that in 4 years' time, maybe mobile technology would offer me the same potential as anywhere else in the world back in Sri Lanka. And that's why I did my PhD in mobile and came back. So I think it's important to first make that decision. And then, as employers, I think we are quite happy to have foreign graduates enrich our employee base, the diversity that we have, and also to see our employees go away in 3, 4, 5 years. I think the gentleman seated next to you is a good example, who was working for us and then went overseas for many years, and now I think I just heard that he has rejoined us, which is great news. It's the diversity can come from external graduates, but also from our own employees who go out for a second run or for a first run overseas to do a PhD or to work in a foreign company and then come back. Like Keith said, I think actually the first job in Sri Lanka or your second job in Sri Lanka is not the end point. I have many of my subordinates who are now at top management positions overseas, and one of them actually is becoming a CEO of another mobile company overseas. Opportunities are boundless. Sri Lanka is a good place to work, it's a good place to learn, and it's a good place to grow a career. So I think we welcome anyone to come.
Thanks, Hans. Ladies and gentlemen, before we wind up this session, you'd like to say?
At the universities, the gender is not an issue because the same salary is paid to both, whether you're a female or a male. Very low salary. Very low salary. However, now, Morocco is, as you all know, is a very technological place. 2 years ago, out of the 3 deans, 2 were women. And I, as vice chancellor, had to deal with 2 ladies. Life was not very easy, but they did a fantastic job. One was Mr. who is still the director of the Dialogue Lab, which is our first industry-university collaboration in setting up a lab. And I think, if not for Dilika and Dia's efforts, we wouldn't have this whole concept of industry-university labs. She was hard with it, ran with it, and certainly given an opportunity. So salary is not an issue. Salary is there, but of course opportunities comes later. On the other question I also have you, I think, as I said earlier, it's a personal choice. When you finish your degree, whatever stage, you need to find out whether you can come back and try to. If you can't, you have to go. You can go back. In terms of training, if it's a professional area, whether it's IT, engineering, training wherever you get is similar. It's like a you know, say if you have an engineering degree, what you need is to get your 3 years of practical training. And that's recognized. So whether you come and work here or work there, professionally you are not going to get beaten up. So I'm also talking as a father whose daughter is doing an engineering degree and is hoping she'll come back. So we have also looking at strategies. But at the end of the day, in terms of training, it's not an issue. I think you will get a good training. Of course, you must have a good degree and one of these people must be convinced that you can contribute. Having said that, training is, in terms of professional, not an issue.
Sure.
On the gender diversity issue, coming from
this is the problem, all the men's talk eventually end up in women.
Our industry is typically about 24% female, and Vetus are just under 30 in that context. But I think that if you look at our sort of leaderboards and our leaders, project managers, program managers and so forth, having been right here in the middle of an all-male panel, I will tell you that some of our top talent in that context, in terms of managing multiple engagements and multiple channels, are women in terms of their ability to handle and be on the top of their game. So it's not an issue about the opportunity. I think it's more about personal circumstances where people decide that they want to go do something else. But certainly in the IT space you'll find that there's a good representation even at the CEO level in companies in Fortune 100 corporations where Marissa Myers and recent appointments have certainly shown that women can break that perceived glass ceiling, if you like, and can make it right to the top.
My comment is that all male panel insists that there is no glass ceiling, right? But there is, because from the audience reaction. So we would like to know.
Each one of our panelists. Professor Anderson mentioned about 3 types of people. One set of people who are decided what come may they will return. The second set of people are on the fence folks. So starting from Rohan, what is the industry-specific advice you would like to give to people who are on the fence to encourage them to return?
Sri Lanka is no place like working and living in Sri Lanka. There's never a dull moment here. So much of opportunity.
Yes, I would endorse that fully. I think. Make that personal choice, and I hope that choice is in favor of Sri Lanka.
Professor has already given it. I also agree, because you see, this is the best time, because after 30 years we have had no conflict here, and I hope, pray and confident that there won't be in the next 30 years. So this is the best time to come in here, because we are just on the verge of taking off. And because we work with many expatriates, and once people come in here, they don't want to go. So there is no reason why we should not get back to Sri Lanka and contribute towards this growth, because these are exciting times, and I believe that all the young people not only will benefit, but it's their duty to give back to the country at this juncture.
I think if you think about the opportunity, obviously the advantages of living in your home country are tremendous, but especially for opportunities in our space, where you have the opportunity to live here in your home country but still work with sort of the Fortune 100 companies. So you're not giving up on any of the innovation and sort of the scale and the access to those Western markets. And I think that provides a tremendous opportunity. I mean, in the last year we've seen maybe 15 people, senior folk coming back, and they're loving it because they're back in their home base, but they're also continuing to work with global giants, if you like, on sort of very relevant and contextual issues and challenges.
Thanks. So ladies and gentlemen, so what we attempted to do is to understand what are the specific characteristics, growth prospects, growth momentum of these 5 sectors we discussed here, and what are the opportunities for Sri Lankan returnees and professionals, and also we addressed certain gender issues which could be important for returnees who are looking for to make sure that there are no gender-specific discrimination. And it was a rare privilege to have 4 leading business executives on stage, and together with very leading academic enlightening us on this very important area about industry-specific growth prospects and the opportunities for returnees. And the stage held very well. And please thank our panelists. Put your hands together. Thank you.
Thank you all, particularly for giving us females another opportunity to remind you of our presence as well. I think today has been a truly informative and thought-provoking day, which has touched on a number of diverse areas of interest. Something that I would really like to reiterate at this point is that yes, we are aware of information gaps and other concerns in making Sri Lanka a great work destination, but through projects like WorkInSriLanka, we are trying to address these issues and find solutions as proactively as possible. So we hope all of this will inspire many of you to come explore Sri Lanka as newcomers or returnees and make the most of the opportunities available to you. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now reached the end of today's formal proceedings, and I would now like to invite Mr. Naina Samaranayaka to present the vote of thanks. Naina is a senior software engineer at Google and is currently engaged in writing the next iteration of the Google search engine. So if something goes wrong, you should probably talk to him. He was based at both the Google headquarters in Mountain View and in the Google office in New York City between 2005 and 2012. Naina is also the founder of SL2 College, a very dynamic student volunteer group, and WorkInSriLanka is a project which emerged via SL2 College. Naina has a BSc in Computer Science with a minor in Economics from the Illinois Institute of Technology and an MSc in Computer Science from Stanford University.
He's currently based in Bangalore and works 2 weeks of every month in Sri Lanka, during which time volunteers like ourselves find ourselves organizing conferences and cross-checking spreadsheets on a regular basis. So Naina, over to you. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to first of all thank you all for coming here for the inaugural WorkInSriLanka Conference. It's great to see so many people from so many different countries, and it's also great to see a lot of non-Sri Lankans here, which is something we didn't really expect when we were organizing this. We had a lot of great sessions. We had some really great keynote speakers, followed by some very interesting panel discussions. There's a lot of information being shared, some heated debates, which is also good. There's a lot to be done here. We're just starting off. So I think we need people to communicate to us what are the needs, so that we can actually go about and solve these issues. And we can engage industry, and we can get back to you on providing the correct information so that you don't get misled. So events like this, you can't run it for free. So we actually have, okay, Andrew, can you switch slide for me? Anybody who can switch slides for me? Okay, there we go. Technology issues. So, like I said, you can't run an event like this for free. So we have a lot of supporters. It's actually been pretty overwhelming how supportive industry has been to this effort. We have a lot of people who have actually sponsored twice. They sponsored our launch event in May, and they didn't even hesitate to sponsor again. So it's very, very encouraging for us as a volunteer organization. We have our national partners who are ICT Agency of Sri Lanka. We have our platinum sponsors, Etisalat. We have the gold sponsors, 99X Technologies, CodeGen, CAMS, John Keels Group, Microimage, WSO2, and MAS Holdings. Silver sponsors, Creately, Lanka Edge Network, Stacks, Virtusa, Oder, AP Kure, and our online ticketing partner, Tickets.lk, and our industry partners, the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, SLASCOM, the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport, and the Employees Federation of Ceylon. I'd also like to thank our media sponsors, which is not listed on slides, but Associated Newspapers Limited of Ceylon. And also, there were a lot of people who supported that you don't really see. They work behind the scenes. And also, especially the speakers and panelists. There were a lot of people who have very, very busy schedules. But it was very encouraging whenever we send an email asking somebody, can you please be in this panel? They reply straight away saying, yeah, sure, I'll be really happy to be on this panel or take a keynote speaking slot. So it's very, very exciting. I feel like everybody, the whole industry is getting together along with us, and we have all these industry bodies working with us. There are so many people who came to me and said, how can I help you? So we have a lot of well-wishers, and it's great to see all this enthusiasm. We'd also like to thank Mr. Hero and his team for helping with the video recording. And finally, this whole project is done by SLT College. This is SLT College's Brain Gain project. So we help students figure out their higher education options, and a lot of students leave the country, as a few people mentioned during the panel discussion. So the Brain Gain project tries to bring these people back or provide the information that is needed. Because a lot of people don't know where to get the correct information unless you have friends at high places. So we want to kind of break that situation. We want to bridge the gap and provide all the information that people need. Like I said, done by SLT, this is a volunteer group, and volunteers have spent a lot of time on this event. We have a team of about 12 people, and they've pretty much been working a lot of hours after work. Everybody has a day job, and they were really committed, and they put in a lot of hours to make this event a success. So I'd actually like to call the team up on stage since this is a volunteer organization. I think we need to recognize the volunteers that are putting in the work. Okay guys, you guys can't be shy, you guys need to come on. I think we need to work on the shyness part. You now know the people who are in the team, so during cocktails afterwards you can go chat with them. If you have questions,